The Pelicans have overhauled their roster, but is this actually a group that fits head coach Willie Green and what he wants to do? It's the Friday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with you on this Friday, final show of the week. I want to get into, does this roster fit head coach Willie Green? But also why it might not even matter. We're going to look at a little bit more of the Mount Rushmore talk, some changes I thought about doing. I want to kind of dive in on that a little bit. And then Pierre the Pelican, the mascot, getting massively disrespected. We're going to cover it all in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. And don't forget, you can watch us every weekday on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network at 10:30 a.m. So let's get into this one, because I'll tell you the evolution of this topic that I want to look at here. And this is something we'll explore more. You know, as I'm going to do this segment on Saddiq Bey and what he could bring to the team, and as I was doing, a little bit of a deeper dive on Saddiq Bey, coming off the injury that kept him out all of last season, it has some nice stats, but overall, I don't find him to be the most impactful player. And the longtime everydayers know I loved him going into the draft that one year. That was who was in my mock draft, who I selected for New Orleans, I think. Really liked Saddiq Bey. Believe in Villanova players in general, I think. But he has not been a good defender. Right? Look, he can be a good spot-up shooter. He can shoot off the bounce a little bit too. He doesn't really create for himself or others, though. Basically, it's just you got to give him the ball and he gets some tunnel vision and he's going to do what he wants to do offensively. And it ends up being like an inefficient scorer that has a good enough three-point percentage. But rebounds at an acceptable level, maybe slightly above average. That's about it, right? He isn't a defensive-minded guy in the slightest here. And so my whole thing, seeing that of they brought in a guy who is not a defender, not a wing defender at all. And then you look at the other guys they brought in. Jordan Poole, not known for his defense. Jeremiah Fears, not known for defense. Derek Queen, not known for defense. And all of a sudden, it's like, wait a second. And I've talked about this on the show a little bit too, but it's like, man, they really brought in a group that are all these guys going to make Willie Green pull his hair out? Kind of situation. And so this segment more from talking about Saddiq Bey to, I think, being more of an exploration of what's going on here with the roster when your head coach is Willie Green, and does this roster fit that kind of idea? And look, the answer is absolutely not, right? This roster does not fit head coach Willie Green all of that well if you go by Willie Green's kind of established tendencies and traits. It makes the whole thing more confusing. When you're looking at all the grades out there about the Pelicans offseason, and none of them are good, right? It's like literally a D or F in every sort of grade. And I think some of that's hyperbolic and just kind of leaning in on things before and piling on and all of that stuff, because truthfully, who knows? And, no one, the easier point to make is they brought in a bunch of offensive guys for a defensive-minded coach. And is that the way they want to go? Is that something that makes sense? And I think the answer to that would be no. I think I wouldn't mind reading a thing that grades the Pelicans offseason an F when you look at all of it rather than the individual moves that they're making, and talk more about fit and things like that, because that is questionable here. And it makes you wonder, what's the plan? How is this all going to work going forward? And, then it's going to lead to the natural thing of they should fire Willie Green and bring in a new head coach, or elevate James Borrego since they retained him and didn't let him leave, and so on and so forth. But here's the thing with that, that I do think gets lost here. And that's, this doesn't really fit Willie Green as Willie Green is now. But coaches can change too. and with a new regime here, I'm sure Willie Green and Joe Dumars are very much working closely on what this team is going to look like next. I can confirm they're working closely and can, working on what this team is going to look like next season. And I think that's a great thing. I think this is a group that, really should be kind of figuring out what's best with your rosters rather than, forcing these players to adapt to Willie Green. Willie Green should adapt to the players. And I want to use Mike Brown as an example. This is someone who's got incredible staying power around the league, taking over multiple jobs, right? Cleveland, LA, Sacramento, now the New York Knicks. This is someone who's kind of been around and done things very, interestingly. He was a defensive-minded coach. He was a defensive guy in Cleveland, a defensive guy in LA, and then he went to the Sacramento Kings that had tons of firepower offensively, but no defense, and he made it work, right? You looked at him in Sacramento and was like, is this going to work? Like, is this how this should go? And, I was really questioning how that fit would work. And then Mike Brown adapted, right? He grew. I had him as my coach of the year that year that they were, the 3 seed in Sacramento, because I think it showed incredible growth from him of being like, well, I got offensive players, so we're going to just build one of the best offenses in the league, and we'll just outscore you. Look, there's something to be said for that. You got to play defense too, or you at least got to try to play defense too. But he really went against all of his known strengths and qualities and went in a completely different direction. And I think that says a lot. There's nothing to say that Willie Green can't do that Willie Green can't grow as a coach, right? We tend to think of player progression as being linear, but it's not always. It kind of has ups and downs with it too. Look, coaches progress too. They grow as well, and they can adapt to trends and players. And that's what makes a coach exceptionally great, not being rigid and forcing it to fit the system. Greg Popovich kind of changed everything the Spurs did multiple times. Eric Spoelstra has kind of changed the way that team works and operates as well. I'm kind of looking at the longer tenured guys here, with all that. So seeing all of that, I think when you have that, Willie Green can potentially do it as well. I'm not guaranteeing that by any stretch, but certainly there's nothing to say he can't. But this is really the make or break it, prove it year for him. He's going in on an expiring deal. If he coaches this team well and they win a bunch of games, he's going to get a massive payday, whether it's by the Pelicans or elsewhere, right? Most likely by the Pelicans, because he can then walk for nothing, and they're going to have to pay him to retain him, and there will be other teams looking to hire him potentially if he makes the playoffs with this group. And if he doesn't, he's going to be out of a job. It's as simple as that. Now, that makes me nervous about some of the players that he's going to play. But here's the thing. If it's one of those things where it's like he's going to lean on the established vets, the established vets aren't better than I think some of the young guys here. If you're leaning on, Saddiq Bey more than some of the younger players, you're going to be disappointed by that. So Willie Green is going to, you're going to lose. Basically what I'm saying is you're still going to lose games. Willie Green's going to be forced to play the best guys and the guys that give him the best chance to win in their best roles and what's best suited to them. If you're forcing Jeremiah Fears to be like a defender or something along those lines, you're going to lose games. But if you use Jeremiah Fears or Derek Queen or even Saddiq Bey or any of the players in the best ways possible, there's enough talent here to be competitive and to get into the postseason, whether it's through the play-in tournament or not, right? They can succeed. There's a chance for it. I'm not saying it's high, and I think their ceiling is, getting into the playoffs through the play-in tournament. But there's potential for this team to be good, assuming there is some health. Willie Green, to make the most of that, is going to need to lean into the strengths of this team, which right now looks to be offense. That might mean relying on James Borrego a good bit, whatever it might be. He doesn't really have a choice here. Otherwise, he's going to be out of a job, and he might be out of a job before the season ends. So when I see that this roster doesn't fit and it adds to kind of some of the confusion and all of that, yeah, it does. But it also is ignoring that coaches can grow, and if they don't, there will be changes here in New Orleans, which I think a lot of fans probably feel has been a long time coming. Let me know what you think about the roster, the fit with head coach Willie Green, what might happen there. Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. So coming up next, let's continue the Mount Rushmore discussion. We've got the names. Where would I have maybe made some changes? Where did I almost make changes? All of that. I want to look at that and what this says overall about the franchise. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Gametime. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale. And then you're going to lose out on your spot for the show you've been dying to see. And live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. And that's where Gametime comes in. Gametime makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever, as prices actually drop the closer it gets to showtime. And you can save up to 60% off with killer last-minute deals. So if you're tired of endlessly scrolling through to find the best deal, Gametime's Zone Deals pick the best seats in each section for you. You pick the section, it's going to just tell you the best price, the best seats to go and get. And if you're going to a venue you've never been to before, the app shows you a panoramic seat view, so there are no surprises. So take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And don't forget, you can watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network every weekday at 10:30 a.m. And for your second listen, it's Locked On NBA. We got 2 Locked On NBA shows right now. I'm on there on Fridays too, so we're looking at the Western Conference actually. But for your second listen, find the Locked On NBA podcast where there is no off season. Doug, Matt, and Hayes keep you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed NBA fan. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's continue the Mount Rushmore discussion here before we get into a little bit of mascot talk. A housekeeping note as well, too, that I think is interesting but inconsequential for the team. This is more just something that I'm like, oh, this is kind of fascinating. We'll talk about that in a second here. You know, the Mount Rushmore for picking 4 faces, 4 players to put on there for this franchise. You know, and it's starting from when they relocated from Charlotte, so you don't get the Jazz era here. It's basically 2002 and onward to now. Look, it hasn't been good. In terms of the wins and losses and the lack of playoff success. They've only made playoffs back-to-back years, true playoffs back-to-back years. We're not counting the play-in tournament, twice in franchise history. It's just been a lot of up 1 year, down for a couple, up 1 year, down for a couple. It can succeed here, right? Like, this city gets nuts for basketball when the team's good. The team needs to deliver on their promise to fans, which we're hoping Joe Dumars will do. But it makes it a little bit tough to pick Mount Rushmore names, right? Chris Paul was an easy one. That's why I led with him, right? That's the easiest one on here. I even think David West might be the second easiest one to put on there too. And it goes to like what I said about an all-star game. You know, usually the best team in the league needs to have 2 guys, right? It might be Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. You know, it might be J-Dub and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander from the Thunder. But, like, you've got to have 2 guys from the best team in the league. Really, the 2 or 3 best teams. Usually put 2 guys onto the all-star roster, and then everyone kind of gets one, and it kind of goes from there. You know, same thing. The best era was that Chris Paul era, David West era, Tyson Chandler era, right? That group needs to have 2 representatives on Mount Rushmore for now. Then it's, kind of pick your seasoning here. Anthony Davis statistically made a ton of sense, but the exit was so bad, and the way he kind of double and tripled down on how weird and awful that exit from New Orleans was, the trade request, and trying to strong arm the team, like, that changes things, because I do think, how you carry yourself, how you act, and all of that, like, does matter. But the statistics and individual accolades that he had made it tough to leave him off. And I think when you kind of look at the current era, Herb Jones hasn't been here long enough, though I love him and, could see him on there in the future. Same for Trey. Zion's certainly not there yet. Brandon Ingram, just doesn't have a claim over some of the other names on there. Drew Holiday's tenure just wasn't quite good enough, I think, to do it. And he was always kind of the number 2 on the team, and not, the number 2 on the best era is one thing, but less so in not the best era of franchise history. And then Baron Davis, right? Like, I like the idea of kind of putting someone on there who honors the history, the introduction of the NBA back to New Orleans during that time here. He has the shortest tenure, barely over 100 games of all the people that we mentioned, but feels fitting to put him on there. But I could leave off Baron Davis. I could have been convinced to leave off Anthony Davis if there were like truly better alternatives. And, while I stand by the Baron Davis one, maybe I don't mind that on there. Chris Paul, David West, Baron Davis, I can see on there. And I almost thought, and this would have been a cop-out. This really would have been a cop-out of leaving like the fourth one blank and doing the show yesterday on that segment rather than talking about Anthony Davis, because like, do we actually want to like give praise to Anthony Davis? Like, truthfully, I don't. Felt weird doing that, like, skin crawling kind of thing. But it was probably the correct thing to do. But I thought about leaving it blank and being like, it's TBD. But overall, this does say, and a number of y'all said it in the comments of like, it's been hard to be a fan of this franchise at times. I mean, it is and isn't, right? I like basketball. It's easy to root for the hometown team and all of that. So like, you do it, right? And so I don't find it that difficult, but they haven't had like a ton of success where like, it's not like the Lakers where like, we're putting magic on there kind of thing, right? Or the Golden State Warriors where it's like Steph Curry is the easiest thing that you could say there. Or even, Miami with Dwayne Wade, with these guys who had the majority of their careers in one, or their whole career in one place and had unbelievable success because they were like transcendent players. This was a much more difficult exercise, I think, to try and do, and really tells you like, if this team is ever going to have kind of a golden era beyond that Chris Paul kind of era, shouldn't be hard to kind of be the next like generation or era of this team. All you need to do, to kind of do this, all you need to do is make the playoffs in back-to-back years. I think, truthfully, that's the most important thing. When I've talked to a lot of people, when people ask about the fan base and stuff, and you don't hear it as much anymore because I do think that like Pels 12 comment from JJ Redick really galvanized the fan base in a way that it never had before. All of a sudden, it kind of created like a common enemy. And I do think that goes a long way towards fans like kind of sticking it to people, which I think is a good thing, and you hear this less and less, about it being like, is this a problem? Why do they struggle? But I had a lot of media ask me that, especially early on in my career covering this team. And, one of the things was they haven't been consistent, right? People show up when they win, as you would expect. And that doesn't make people like bandwagon fans or anything like that. I do think you need teams to deliver on their promise to fans too. And look, truthfully, as much as it hurts to say it, the team hasn't done that, right? You had Anthony Davis and just didn't have the playoff success you should have. This era under Zion Williamson has not been how you would like it. More to do with Zion Williamson, I think, than like organizational mismanagement like it was under Dell Demps. All this is to say it's just really hard to build a consistent winner. It's really tough to do that, and it takes a lot of luck, I think, at times, and just the right opportunities that don't always come around and being ready to move on said opportunities when they do kind of come around. So it'll be not hard for this team to enter a new era, hopefully, and have a lot of success. I mean, maybe it's hard to have the success, but if they do, everyone on that group is going to kind of get elevated over a number of the people that like came before here. It wouldn't be hard to supplant Baron Davis on the Mount Rushmore. It wouldn't be hard for us to bump Anthony Davis off and put somebody else in, even if they don't have kind of the individual statistics and accolades that Anthony Davis did because of the way his exit was. And that stuff, again, truly matters to me when it comes to it. It's why when talking about Anthony Davis, if you're kind of doing the image of the four heads and everything, right, I would make ADs like 25% smaller than the other four people out there, just as like a little spiteful move, but also like an unwritten message that you're putting out there, right? There's some subtext to that sort of thing. And I think that is definitely like a direction that I would go with it if we were actually like carving things into stone. But do you like the four names that I put in there? What changes would you make? Be nice when it comes to it. This is my personal way that I would go about it, but people might have different criteria. I could see people leaving Baron Davis off. The Brandon Ingram fans are going to put Brandon Ingram on. Drew Holiday has a case, I think, too, as a very beloved player here who kind of did everything right, still has strong ties to the city with the charitable work and everything. And again, I do think that really matters, particularly in New Orleans. So what changes would you make? Am I missing anybody? I think there's a couple other names you could easily like make a case for. especially because like it's not hard to claim that some of these guys don't deserve to be on there. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, but I really almost did about leaving the fourth face blank of like TBD. Maybe it'll be Jeremiah Fears, Derek Queen. Maybe Zion could get on there one day. Hopefully, right? As like an aspirational thing to try and reach for. But let me know what changes you would make, what you think about the 4 names on the Mount Rushmore overall in the comments down below on YouTube. So coming up next, a little bit of housekeeping with the salary cap, and then Pierre the Pelican disrespect. I don't like this. It's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everyday. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. Don't forget, you can watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network every single weekday at 10:30 a.m. And for your second listen today, it's Locked On Saints. Tyler Shook threw an interception. How bad was it? But he looked more aggressive, more assertive. Ross Jackson is breaking down an indoor day from minicamp or training camp, whatever it is, over at the Locked On Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make Ross Jackson and Locked On Saints your second listen today. So 2 things here. First and foremost, the housekeeping thing with the salary cap in the books that I've just been baking into my projections and numbers that I've been sharing with y'all. Technically, when I'm recording this, which is on the 31st, even though the show is for the 1st, the second round picks now count against the salary cap. They don't count from July 1 to July 30th. They go onto your books on July 31. Basically, it just means your second round picks don't preclude you from making other moves. This has no impact on the Pelicans. All of the numbers that I've been saying have factored in Micah Peavy's contract, their second round pick that they have already signed to a deal. It's just a little bit interesting that like they don't count. So you might have seen some projections for the Pelicans that like don't add up to mine. It's probably because they weren't including Micah Peavy's contract on there. Now that they count against the salary cap, there you go. He's on the books when it comes to everything. But it functionally doesn't change a single thing for New Orleans. Just like one of those like accounting things that I kind of find interesting around the salary cap and how it all works. The other thing I want to talk about here is over at the website For the Win, which is USA Today's NBA stuff. And that is, and I'm not going to be mean because like this is just more for fun, Brian Kalbrowski is doing a ranking of all current NBA mascots. Where do you think Pierre the Pelican and or King Cake Baby rank in this one? Pausing for dramatic effect here. I was shocked when I saw it. He has them ranked 30th. They're basically ranking the teams from 1 to 30. So any of like all your mascots kind of count towards that ranking. The Pelicans are 30th. They're behind teams that don't have mascots like the Lakers. The Knicks don't have mascots. The Warriors don't have mascots. The Brooklyn Nets don't have like an actual like mascot anymore. Behind the Boston Celtics Celtic guy, which is just like a dude, right? The leprechaun or whatever he is. Lucky the leprechaun. The only other like mascot that's like, yeah, right before him is the Dallas Mavericks. I am shocked by this. I'm genuinely shocked. Look, all mascots are fun. All mascots are fun. Pierre the Pelican has a funny story of the redesign to the more like, puppet-esque, Muppet-esque face than what was there originally for him. When you looked at it and they went through that whole rebrand of Pierre that he broke his beak and then had surgery. Like, I love tying in, like, lore is the popular word to use with all of this now. Like, kind of tying that stuff in and making it work and kind of making it like an in-universe thing to justify some of the changes. I think that's great. That should elevate him higher. That in a pickup game, he broke his face, had surgery, and now looks differently. That's hilarious to me, truthfully. It's just a fun mascot. I don't think he's 30th here. What I think is holding him down, and this is just even worse, is, Brian, I love you here, buddy, but King Cake Baby does not drag down the team, right? It said, quote, "The other New Orleans mascot, King Cake Baby, is so much scarier than the rest of the mascots in the league combined. Whatever this is feels illegal, and I don't like it one bit. The league has no place for this monstrosity." End quote. That's exactly what makes him awesome, right? It started off kind of as a joke of just doing the king cake baby from the baby inside king cakes, which if you don't know and don't get that, then you don't get it. And look your stuff up, and it's kind of fun and a very great tie to the city of New Orleans when he's only brought out for carnival season. I kind of love that. And then leaning into the gag that he's terrifying, right? Kind of building off of Mason Ginsberg's work earlier on with that. I love that. It's fun. It's different. I see King Cake Baby and it's hilarious. The other thing is you can hire King Cake Baby to come to your parties during certain times of the year. It's wonderful. It's a goofy thing that media people around the league have leaned into. Zach Lowe is someone that's leaned into that, right? ESPN has leaned into it with King Cake Baby being creepy and fun, and it just works for me. It's super quirky. It has the right ties to New Orleans and just feels so unique to the city. And it's not just like a generic mascot, like, you know, here's a bear doing bear things and dunking a basketball. It could be anywhere, right? But King Cake Baby can only be in New Orleans and ties into so many different things. To put them at 30 is so disrespectful, in my opinion here. I love King Cake Baby. I love all of that stuff. I think it is so much fun. Like the creepy part, truthfully, as we wrap up the show, this will probably be the last thing I say. The creepiest part is the person who dresses up as the King Cake Baby in like that like what are they called, like morph suits or whatever, and then the face on him, and it's like a human King Cake Baby, but not a mascot one, and that person sitting in the stands. That's a little creepy. I dig the effort. It's funny to me. I enjoy all of this weird stuff. It's creepier than the mascot himself, though. You like King Cake Baby? Do you like Pierre? Do you think they should be 30? Should they be higher? Let me know in the comments down below. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, this week of Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'll be back with y'all next week.